Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly Studios, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Civic Cypher, where our mission is to foster allyship, empathy, and understanding. I am your host, Ramses Ja. Big shout out to my partner in crime, my co-host Q Ward, who is on an airplane right now, and he will be landing, and very upset that he's going to miss today's conversation. But have no fear, he will be back in the saddle next week to bring you more of what you know and love. But in the meantime, we have a gentleman by the name of Bobby Nichols. Bobby Nichols is the former Phoenix Democratic Socialist of America's chapter chair and current member. He is the founder of Arizona Works Together, a pro-union political action committee operating at the state level. Additionally, Bobby Nichols works for the Office of the Arizona Attorney General as a state attorney representing Arizona's Departments of Child Safety and Economic Security in Superior and administrative court cases involving the abuse, neglect, and exploitation of minor children and vulnerable adults. Man, that is a mouthful.
Right.
But welcome to the show, man. We appreciate you taking the time for us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and just want to make very clear that I am not here in my official Attorney General's capacity. I am only here as a private citizen and an activist and an organizer and a democratic socialist.
We've absolutely heard that before. And as you've heard, he's going to be talking to us about democratic socialism, about socialism, and giving us sort of maybe a crash course or a 101 level course of what socialism is, because I think the fear of socialism and socialist programs has caused us perhaps to move politically in a direction that doesn't really benefit the most people, and that fear is often based in ignorance. And so if indeed that is the case, we are going to drive out that ignorance with a conversation with you today. So we appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us. But as always around here, we like to start off with some ebony excellence. And today's ebony excellence comes from Black Enterprise. The National Hockey League's recent draft highlighted increasing diversity within the sport. How about that? Marking a notable shift in a league where just 3 years ago, 84% of players, coaches, and front office staff were white. In 2023, the NHL launched its version of NASCAR's Drive for Diversity campaign, the Hockey Diversity Alliance, a group whose seeds were planted in the wake of the 2020 murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. The initial chairs of the group were former NHL players P.K. Subban and Anson Carter, both of whom are Black. The aim of the group is to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment so that one of the NHL's slogans, "Hockey is for everyone," is more than an advertising campaign. On draft night, the work that the Diversity Alliance has put in over the last 2 years bore fruit, as more than 20 future NHL players from diverse backgrounds were selected in the NHL draft. So I love this, and to be fair, Q talked to me about this. He had a weird flight schedule, as I mentioned, so just didn't time out. He got bumped. So he could give you a lot more context on all things sports related, because I'm famously not the sports guy. I'm the music guy. He's music and sports. But as far as diversity, I think this is one of those examples that shows people that diversity is a good thing, and in order to get true diversity, like in its fullness, you need equity, and then those things lead to inclusion. And so the NHL now can look forward to, in my estimation, more fans of diverse backgrounds, and the league and the sport growing because of their inclusive efforts. And so shout out to the NHL. Never thought I'd say that, but here we are talking about them. All right, now it is time for us to move to the man of the hour. Okay, so Bobby Nichols. Socialism.
What is it good for?
No, I don't think we're gonna go there. So most people know Bernie Sanders, right? Maybe not everybody knows that Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat.
Right.
He considers himself a democratic socialist, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Okay. So before we get to what his specific delineating language what that means, let's talk about kind of a base level understanding of socialism. What is socialism?
So it's important to establish up front that we currently live under a different system of socialism called capitalism, which is a system where the wealthiest of the wealthy, the owners of the businesses and the means of production, as socialists would call it, are the ones who get to decide how you work, when you work, and where the money goes. They're the ones who get to determine who has the ability to move up in society and who has ability to exceed in their level in society. Okay. And I realized just now that I'm rambling a little bit there, but let me kind of bring it back to the ultimately what socialism is an economic system where the workers control the production that they create over time.
So does that mean that in a socialist framework that people don't own businesses?
That is not necessarily the case. Okay. In a socialist framework, if you're working in a business, then you own a part of that business. If you're working in a society, you own a part of that society. It is essentially the democratization of every single aspect of society, from the business to the home to the armies to the governments, and trying to establish that egalitarian system all the way down.
Sure. I'm thinking like shares of the business. Is this the way that ownership is manifested? Like right now, if I work for, let's say, iHeartMedia, and I can have shares in the company because of my employment, I don't have to buy them separately. Is it a similar? Am I thinking of that?
That's sort of inspired by socialism. Okay. You might say in a socialist system, iHeartRadio is owned by the people, and the people determine through the state how it is going to be operated and where that profit is going to go.
So there's no NASDAQ or Dow, like those sorts of things.
Those sorts of things wouldn't have the same level of influence in a socialist society. Okay. Ultimately, because again, the profit motive that drives our current society would not be what drives a socialist society.
Okay, so I'm going to get ahead of myself, but I saw an interview with Bernie Sanders. And this was an old interview from a long time ago. And it stayed with me because I never really thought of it in this way. And I'm interested to get your thoughts here. But the interviewer asked Bernie Sanders, who is probably the most famous socialist that many people know about. And people love this guy. I wish I could have voted for Bernie.
He's got the highest approval rating in the country.
Yeah, I bet he does, yeah. And he seems like such a kind man. But anyway, the interviewer asked Bernie Sanders, do you believe that, I'm going to be paraphrasing, so effectually what he was saying was, do you believe that people are motivated by profit, like inherently motivated by profit, because that's kind of what we, I guess, see?
Yeah.
And Bernie Sanders said something to the effect of, no, I don't believe that. I believe that people will cooperate even if they're not motivated by profit. I think that the spirit of cooperate, like he said it way more eloquently, and I wish I had the interview so I could play the sound clip for you, but it was just brilliant. And I never thought of anything outside of money make the people move before. So your thoughts?
So I think that's a really interesting point that gets into like the history of our society. Okay. And I think people assume that this profit motive, this bartering system idea goes all the way back to ancient history. And in fact, it just kind of doesn't. Industrial capitalism, the system that we have right now, where business owners, and not just business owners, but like the owners of the business owners, the people who are running not just the shops, but the factories that produce the goods that go into the shop, the conglomerates. Yeah. That system developed in 16th century England as a result of the Industrial Revolution in a society that was insulated enough to have a nobility that could take on feudal powers much earlier than they could in, say, France or Austria or Germany, which happened later in the 1800s. But you go to England in the 1500s and 1600s with the Civil War that eventually drove out who were the people at the time were known as Puritans, but crazy religious people that we think of. But at the time, they had the idea of universal male suffrage and these other sort of democratic ideas that have become a lot of the basis of more modern thoughts about egalitarian society and egalitarian governance. Those people were driven out of England as a result of having lost a civil war against feudal society, against the kings. And ultimately what ended up happening was they set up new societies in the New World, and not the New World, obviously. They were colonizing the New World and extracting the most profit that they could from the New World for the purpose of enriching themselves, which they viewed as their like God-given right. You go back before that, though, you go back into ancient times, you go back even into feudal Europe and the areas where the kings didn't have nearly as much authority. You have communes being set up where peasants are making food for themselves and governing themselves, and the goods are distributed in kind rather than held by one person, paid for by another person's labor. So rather than having a system where people rent labor to the owners of a field, let's say, to get their bread at the end of the day, the field has been owned by everyone for as long as anybody can remember. It goes back into time immemorial, before records were written down, that my father and his father and his father and his father all tilled this field, all worked this land. And it wasn't until kings and feudal knights and lords came in and oppressed people that we started to see these class delineations within that agrarian society. And it is ultimately the dream of the oppressed to become the oppressor. And so as a merchant class rises up, and that's obviously not fully true, it's just another statement, pardon my language, but the motive that people have ultimately is to in my opinion, to live good lives, to have children, to eat good food, to enjoy the time that they spend with their family and their friends and their community, to not feel as though they have someone looking down their neck at all times. And that is represented in this society by having money, by being able to go out and do whatever you want. And like, you can't do that unless you own the business or you work at the business. You're not able to do that otherwise. In a socialist society, we're looking at we're not trying to retract and go back to an agrarian, feudalist, peasant, commune society. We recognize that capitalism has brought progress in production. It has brought us to the place where we can, if the modes of production and the means of production were given over to people rather than for purposes other than profit, we could enter a society that didn't have scarcity. We don't have to have homelessness. We have far more empty homes than we do homeless people, but they're all owned by BlackRock, and you can't get any profit by giving them away to homeless people. And in the same way, we have plenty of money in the government, but it's all owned by BlackRock, and so it'd be better if it goes to bombing children in Gaza or destroying neighborhoods that aren't being gentrified yet, so that they can continue to upsell the luxury apartments. Like, Trump's actually thinking about building luxury apartments in Gaza in the same way that they're building luxury apartments in the neighborhoods that they've bulldozed over the years in America. And I think that I missed the question a little bit. But ultimately,
I think that we all needed that as a foundational framework for this, because a lot of folks, when you think of things like socialism, capitalism, communism, they feel, I think for a lot of folks, they feel like intimidating, right? And I think I'm talking regular people that wake up, they got to wake up tomorrow and go to work. And then they got to be somewhere at 10, and they got to get their kid, those people. That they hear these terms. For those terms to actually start to live in their minds, and them to begin to be able to imagine a reality where things don't feel the way that they feel right now, because there's a lot of people, I'm sure, that feel tremendous pressure just living their lives, and they don't know where the pressure is coming from. They have to, I gotta pay these bills, why is life so hard, blah, blah, and they're just, it's just the way it is. So I appreciate the little bit of the history lesson.
And if I could say one last thing on that, I think there's a really great quote by the author Ursula K. Le Guin, who speaks a lot about science fiction being a tool for critiquing modern society rather than like any sort of prediction about what the future is going to be. And her quote, I love this quote, is, "We live under capitalism, and its power seems inescapable, but so did the divine right of kings. This is just another human-made political system that we live under now."
So while we're here, and I know we're super duper off script, but talk to the person listening to this conversation who has come to fear socialism like a bad word. Talk to that person and say to that person, here's what socialism can do for you. And here's what capitalism has taken from you. Say that to the person listening.
And I want to start by validating that fear, because we live in a society that has had on nearly 100 years now of anti-socialist, anti-communist, anti-progressive, anti-leftist propaganda, first inspired by the McCarthyist Red Scare coming out of World War II. And then even before that, when the business owners, even though they were sending money to Lenin and Stalin and the Bolsheviks when they were fighting the czars in Russia, even then recognized that this was going to be a threat to their domination over society. So first things first, the way that you're feeling, if you're afraid of the word socialism, is not invalid, and you're not alone. It has become scary to a lot of people, and it's because we've been told over and over and over that it's scary. I can't tell you how many movies from the 80s just had ambiguous red-wearing socialists as the bad guys, and that cultural impact sticks with people. But I think what we're seeing today is all of the things that people fear-mongered about socialism have come to pass under capitalism. We have bread lines. We have incredible homelessness. We have inability to get medical care. We have a society where if you want to go to school, you have to fight in the army. We already have these things that they were saying would happen under socialism. We've seen shortages at the grocery stores in results of catastrophes. We just recently saw the government's inability to take care of people in Texas or to respond to crises as a result of bureaucratic slashing and cutting and inefficiencies. That is what capitalism has done for us. The idea that the capitalists have built this incredible society, even in my opinion, is inaccurate, because I haven't seen Jeff Bezos ever print a shirt. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg himself has done any of the coding in the last 15 years. And I'm positive that Elon Musk has not contributed anything valuable to his companies at any point. Period. Aside from potentially some emerald diamonds stolen from the workers of South Africa and the people of South Africa.
Shots fired.
I'm happy to keep firing those shots.
No, we're not going to stop you.
No. So what I would say then is, what can socialism do for people? Let me get just that last point.
Yeah, go for it.
Socialism can reorient society in a way that works for everyone. Again, we're talking about the democratization of everything. So unions in your workplace, that's an example of socialism. Fighting for your rights in terms of your ability to have a 8-hour workday, having the ability to organize, having the ability to ask for higher wages and collectively bargain there. Those are things that were won by anarchists and socialists in the earlier days.
Yeah, I knew that. I did know. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that has really changed American society and changed society around the world. We're talking about if you think even recently, I heard you talking about Cuba a little bit. Cuba's ability to develop vaccines during COVID was one of the most impressive and impactful things for Latin America and South America and every country other than, the United States, essentially, who was willing to take those vaccines and actually help people, because Cuba has spent a lot of time building up a medical society and a medical system that actually works for everyone, instead of what we have here, which is a medical society, a medical profession that is designed to be for profit at the end of the day.
So while we're talking about Cuba, do us a favor. Still talking to the listener that's just come into the conversation about socialism, right? Give some examples, and let's be fair.
Yeah.
Give some examples of socialist governments that have failed the people, and give some examples of socialist governments that have delivered for the people, and discuss the difference between them.
Yeah.
Just because I think most people would start by saying, I pick whatever country that has, no resources and everybody's starving.
Right.
And they say, well, socialism will lead us there. So help us out.
Yeah, and I mean, it's important to recognize that there are historical failures of planning that have been involved a lot of the times with newly revolutionized socialist societies. Okay. So you look at both China and the USSR at the very early stages of their 5-year plans, when they start putting out these large agrarian reforms. There's not a lot of foresight or planning or knowledge from the revolutionary side about how to run these farm systems, and they come into it with a lot of enthusiasm for democratizing the process, though it can result in, when coupled with historic famines that are coming in at the same time, tragedies across the country. Sure. And so those things are, those things happen. There's real crises that have arisen in socialist societies.
Okay.
There are also socialist societies and societies that claim to be socialist that have done more to oppress human rights than they have to uplift them. And that's something that you have to acknowledge with like North Korea and even to some extent China and the USSR as well.
Okay.
Like these are places that have developed political systems, but in the same way that in America you see an aggressive social pushback against socialism or cultural pushback against socialism, in these socialist countries you often see a very strong cultural pushback against capitalism and the liberalism that comes with capitalism.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you see
liberalism comes with capitalism, really?
The concept of liberal capitalism is one of the things that was brought over by the Puritans originally, in a way to separate themselves from the feudalist societies and establish what they believed to be a more meritocratic system. Okay. So like universal male suffrage was a Puritanist idea. Mm-hmm. The idea that the kings wouldn't be able to just arrest anybody they wanted was brought over in that era. And these are not people who were by any means wanting to build socialist societies or even equitable societies. Like these were slave owners and these were profiteers and colonizers. And they still thought that they should have democracy. And so the idea that was invented there was this liberalism. And so when you see in the French Revolution is another good example of this. It's a liberal revolution driven by the bourgeoisie. It is a bourgeois revolution that is, and the bourgeoisie is, it literally translates to like the town dwellers. What it was a merchant class that had developed itself first in southern Europe and then a little bit up in the Nordic areas as like the cities of Vienna and there's one more up in the north. I can't remember what the one in Germany was called, but essentially like these societies were organized where merchants would have, Republican ideals, and they would have Republican representation. Republican meaning, like, they would organize themselves into little groups, and then they would pick a representative, and they would have a republic based on those little groups.
Got it.
The concept of liberalism rose at the same time and hand in hand with the rise of capitalism. And it was following that, following the betrayal of the workers by the liberals, that the ideas of socialism really split at that point. Okay. So what you see in the French Revolution especially is the bourgeois playing to the workers. They know they can't overthrow the kings if they just take the few merchants that are there, go out into the cities and build barricades. They need the workers on their side because they're going to have to grind society to a halt. Otherwise, the king's just going to take over their shops and they're going to have nothing left.
Oh, okay. So how about this? You mentioned a few countries. I think that one of the countries that comes up a lot, at least in my travels, is Venezuela.
Yeah.
Okay. As a failed socialist state.
Right.
And I think you've kind of provided a framework of how socialism can fail. You've certainly provided a framework of how capitalism can fail the people. Right. But I heard something recently that the Nazis were socialists. So what do you say to people who equate the Democratic Socialist of America movement with the Nazi Party?
So the first thing I say to that is Nazi propaganda. The Nazi Party was referred to itself as the National Socialist Party for the explicit purpose of cannibalizing legitimate socialist movements that were gaining popularity around Europe, going back way before World War I even, to 1848, and the liberal revolutions that eventually became socialist revolutions and led to the Paris Commune, which was ultimately crushed by the reactionary Bismarck out of Prussia, forming Germany, etc.
Man, you know your history.
I love the history of this stuff, man. This is the stuff I can go on forever.
Sure.
What was the question that I was supposed to be getting to?
So when people say, the Nazis,
right? So Hitler recognized that socialism was popular, and Mussolini also recognized that socialism was popular. Mussolini was originally a socialist who betrayed the movement for his own vainglorious reasons, and ultimately the development of fascism mirrored the development of socialism because it is intentionally designed to quash socialism, to quash workers' movements, to quash all of these societal progressive.
So they just basically like got they just grabbed that so that the actual socialists couldn't grab it.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
They did it to corrupt the name.
There you go. That's what I'm trying to say.
The movement. Gotcha. And it was historically successful because, people still have this association. But what I would also say then is, who were the first people that the Nazis took off the streets? It was the socialists and the communists and the anarchists. The first people who ended up in the concentration camps.
I was reading that poem that they say where they said...
first they came for the communists.
Yes, that one. First they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I
said nothing.
Yeah.
Then they came for the socialists. And I wasn't a socialist, and I said nothing. Then they came for the anarchists, and I wasn't an anarchist, and they said nothing. Then they came for and it goes on
and then they came for me, and there was no one to speak for me.
Exactly.
So, funny how history...
Hilarious.
Isn't that funny? All right. So, listen, people getting snatched off the streets.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's affecting your family. You speak up because you want them to speak up for you.
Yeah.
Right. I tell you what, while you're listening to me, the reason this show exists is because non-black people came out in 2020 and I saw them with my own eyes, with these eyes right here. I held them with these arms. They supported me. Man, I share this stage with all those people when they need it. I don't forget. All right. Quick question. Give me like 30 seconds, okay?
Okay.
What made you want to join the Democratic Socialist Party of America?
So first thing, the Democratic Socialists of America is not formally a political party.
Okay.
We're more of an activist organization who thinks of itself as the home for socialists, which can be more broadly described than we're going into right now. I decided to join because I believe that people deserve to have some level of control over their lives. And I think that requires a level of control over the economy, over the society, and over the democratic process. Those are things that are denied to us under capitalism, and they are available to us under socialism. And I like democracy, so they're democratic socialism.
There you go. Okay, I'll take that. People point to like a lot of the Nordic countries as being the best places to live, where people are the happiest. And to be fair, a lot of those countries are capitalist countries, but they have really strong socialist programs, and they really do mirror a lot of, I think, or at least they capture kind of the premise of a lot of what socialism stands for. And through that lens, I think it's a lot easier to imagine a better world. So I appreciate you helping paint that picture for all of us.
Yeah.